Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. And to launch us into our first ethics panel for the conference, we have Professor Glen Vogel. Professor Vogel is the Distinguished Visiting Professor of Law for the Department of Law at the Air Force Academy. He comes to us from Hofstra University. He earned a JD with honors from St. John's University School of Law and admitted to practice in New York State and the Federal Eastern and Southern Districts of New York. Professor Vogel has published widely in the areas of constitutional law, taxation, ethics, environmental law, litigation practice and skills, evidentiary rules, securities, and pedagogy. Welcome, Professor Vogel.
Thank you. All right, so you've sat in ways that create a little bit of problems for me because we were supposed to be teams today, but we're going to do the best job we can. We're going to be playing Jeopardy. So I believe to my left is Team Earth. In the center is Team Moon. To the right is Team Mars. We're going to be keeping track of points that you score. So when you have the answer, you're going to wave that piece of paper. Whichever team has their paper up first gets to buzz in and answer the question. So my topic for today is space ethics. An area that actually doesn't have a lot of information out there on it because it's a constantly evolving field, as you may have been gathering from your participation in Space Law Conference in general. So we're going to look today at some things like the impact, the ethics of the impacts that we have when we engage in space exploration, not just on celestial bodies, but environmental, historic impacts, as well as if there happens to be indigenous life out there. Another category is going to be what happens when those explorations come back? Do we risk bringing some form of contamination back here to Earth? We'll also take a look at, now that we have companies that are engaged in private enterprise or collaboratively with governments into space exploration, what does that mean for us ethically? And protection of our Earth's orbits. I heard groups earlier talking about things like satellites. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then last is the military uses of outer space and the ethics associated with that. So these are our categories today. Our first one is called What the Musk. Second category is Watch Your Junk. Third is Let's Ruin Another Celestial Body. Fourth is War is Hell. And last is You Thought COVID was bad. So I did a spinner earlier and Team Mars won. So Team Mars gets to go first. I need you to pick a category and give me a dollar value. What the Musk for 200. Founded in 2002, this company uses Falcon rockets and hopes to colonize Mars with millions of people by 2050. Team Mars, you have an answer? Remember to answer in the form of a question. What is SpaceX? Absolutely. We're going to focus a little bit on SpaceX with its fascination or obsession with Mars. Again, Mars is about half the distance from the sun as the Earth is. So it does contain some decent amount of sunlight, but we do know it's cold. The atmosphere is primarily CO2 with a little bit of nitrogen and argon and a few other trace elements, which means it would be very difficult for plants to grow on Mars. Gravity on Mars is about 38% of that of Earth. So we would all have the strength of Arnold Schwarzenegger if we were living on Mars without having to go to the gym to achieve that. That sounds amazing. What are some of the ethical challenges that might be presented by the fact that SpaceX is really pushing to explore Mars? Well, some challenges in general. I did some research on SpaceX. 314 launches, but only 278 landings. I'm not sure if that data is represented correctly on their site, but that shows an 88% success rate of landing what you're shooting off. That worries me, especially if I'm participating in that other 12%. Is that a statistic that they will get better with? If not, that is an ethical issue for us about payloads, in particular human payload. It's also estimated it will take about 9 months to get to Mars. Once landing there, it will take another 3 months for both Mars and Earth to align sufficiently that a return trip, assuming that's even possible, can be engaged. That will take another 9 months. That's 21 months. Are there ethical issues associated with sending people on a mission like that for 21 months? I know you can stay at the International Space Station for quite a while, but we can get to the International Space Station a lot quicker than we can Mars if we end up having issues with the people who are habitating it on behalf of either NASA or some other space agency. So we have ethical challenges associated with once we put people there, assuming it becomes possible, because they are so far away, what are all the challenges that could arise from that community living there that we might not be able to respond to effectively? Okay. We'll go with the moon. Moon, can you pick a category? Return home for us, board master. Keep track of your points, Mars. Watch your junk for 600. This is the term for when a resource is removed from the environment at a rate faster than it can be replenished. Oh, very close. You know what? Because you're a cadet, I'll give you those points. Close enough. We'll give a little participation award for today. It's actually called overexploitation. So there's this idea that if we are able to get into outer space, there are natural resources out there, right? Well, we have already engaged in what some would call overexploitation here on our own planet. So I'm not sure that it's something we think we would be able to do more effectively in space. Planetary body like the moon, which has no appreciable atmosphere, is going to take a long time, if ever, for it to regenerate its resources. So we think about some ethical challenges. Many of us consider space to be this limitless universe, but it is not. And if we go out there and start harvesting or collecting resources, raw materials, et cetera, if it doesn't have the ability to regenerate itself, are we overexploiting it? Is it worth protecting because it has strategic and commercial value, right? We've already had discussions in some branches, private and governmental, about mining on the moon, right? And those types of exercises. Do we have to be concerned again about overexploitation of those natural resources? All right, let's move over to Earth. Earth, pick a category for us. War is hell for? War is hell for 800. This is the device that the majority of Americans say they could not live without at this point. What is a smartphone? Nice job. If we were to engage in any type of military exercise within the space domain, I'm going to throw out there, what do you think the first target in space would be? What would it be? GPS, which is run off of satellites, right? So let's look at some ethical challenges. A country decides that they're going to engage in some type of aggressive space action and knocks out another country's satellites. Since fully, almost 90% of people surveyed said they can't go a day without their smartphone, imagine ethically what that would do to an adversary and their ability to communicate with their population, run their infrastructure. I think very quickly we would degenerate to something that looks like a post-apocalyptic movie. It would be one of those whoever has weapons wins on the ground. So knocking out satellites is obviously a strategic advantage, but the ethical decision of that, what would that do to the population that we are at war with, even just from a day-to-day sense of being able to navigate with GPS, and all other forms of data, banking, et cetera. All right, we'll go back to Mars. Pick another category, Mars. What the Musk for 300, going for low points. Oh, 800, there we go. Elon Musk has suggested that SpaceX plans to work on this physics phenomena that sounds a lot like the Millennium Falcon jumping to hyperspace. What would that phenomena be? You got to be a scientist to know this one. What is interstellar travel? This is quite interesting because it has been compared to hyperspace, where you are able to travel between solar systems. So one of the ethical challenges of this is that Stephen Hawking, who I will concede is much more smarter than I am, maybe not in the present moment, all things considered, but historically smarter than I am. And he has said that this is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, that wormholes are not fully understood and they could lead to catastrophic results. SpaceX, because this is what the Musk, private company, right? We do know they do a lot of things in conjunction with the government. But if they were to engage in something like this on the private side, what would be our ability to either prevent or regulate, and how would we deal with whatever the repercussions could be? Since again, even someone as smart as Stephen Hawking is unsure what would happen if we're able to achieve this. All right, moon, pick another category. You thought COVID was bad for 400. This is the term associated with the prevention of transferring hazards from space to Earth. I can smell the wood burning. Okay, it is actually backward contamination. Again, I'll go lenient on my cadets. We'll give them points for that. They need all the help they can get. Backward contamination. So yeah, you thought COVID was bad. We don't really know fully what exists as far as bacteria, viruses, et cetera, in space. We know what we've encountered, but we don't know what we might still encounter. Could something like that attach itself to any type of a device or transport module that's sent into space, or even come back with humans? Some ethical challenges with it. We do have protocols in place for decontamination. However, after the earlier Apollo missions, since we've only exploring the moon, and we realize there's not a lot in the way of contamination there, those decontamination protocols have been relaxed. I don't know if they'll be increased if we are able to do some type of a mission that returns from Mars or any other celestial body. But again, we're not sure ethically what are those viruses or other forms of bacteria that exist out there that we might be bringing back here that could be even worse than something like COVID. All right, Earth, pick another category. Someone likes war. This could be a potential launching point to other planets in space. It could be used as a place for a permanent location for military space operations. What is the moon? A moon base. Can you scroll over and hit that audio for me, Jeff? I think the volume has to go up. Not on there on the control box. All the way to your right. The control panel over here. The main panel. Keep on your right. Soundboard. Two sliding points to the right. Keep them up.
get to enjoy seeing
We
their
may have
text
lost
become everyone else's law.
We can still win the
It
race.
was right around that time in the early
Race for
40s
the
that Thomas
base.
reportedly said to a Republican member of
right.
Congress that unless it
Your
gave Supreme Court
testimony
justices a
may be
pay
perfect
raise,
time
quote,
to unveil
one
NASA's
or
new
more will
strategy,
leave soon,
beginning with the pub,
maybe in the next
listen to
year.
Kremlin.
That set
And
off
if this is
alarm
close,
bells
all right.
in conservative quarters.
You can pause that, Jeff. We're having some technological issues. Anyway, for those of you to watch, that's for the Apple Plus show For All Mankind, where there was a big discussion about the race to put a military base on the moon and whether at the time in the 70s, whether the Soviet Union would be able to accomplish that before the US and what it would mean. We do know there are international agreements. Advance, Jeff? Yeah, we do know that there are legal treaties that we've entered into about not putting a military presence on the moon and not using it for violence of other kinds. But that doesn't mean the treaty will be followed, right? What are the ethical implications of it? Not only that, if somebody breaks it first, that sort of breaks the seal. And where do we go from there? Recently, Russia, it was in the Wall Street Journal, there was talk about them possessing some kind of an anti-satellite nuclear device, which would violate any of those treaties because it would have gone into the atmosphere and done what we worried about before, knock out satellites. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I have 3 sons who are in their late teens, early 20s, and I think they would cease to be able to function if their smartphone went dead. Life would be over for them as they know it. That could happen if we populate the moon with some type of weaponry. All right, we'll come back to Mars. Pick another category. Scientists and developers are looking at the possibility of doing this to provide resources here on Earth and help refuel space vehicles. It had been mentioned earlier. It has to do with what? Has to do with the team in the middle. From a specific place. There we go. Mine the moon. Yeah. The moon has natural resources, and yet it is unowned, right? It's agreed that everybody shares the moon. I think that agreement is lovely until somebody goes and puts some kind of a backhoe on the moon and starts digging. Then we'll see how everybody feels about shared ownership at that point. There's also the ethical question of if we have the ability to go there and mine and collect these important resources, what's your obligation if those resources are able to return to the Earth, right? We do have countries that are not in an economic or technological state to be able to do that on their own. Do we have an obligation to share those resources when we come back, ethically or by treaty? Not only that, what are we mining it for, right? Are we mining it for purely commercial purposes or business fuel for future explorations, or is it being mined for something that has a military application to it? Back to the board, Jeff. I think we're at the moon. Watch your junk for 800. Gene Roddenberry, James Doohan, Nichelle Nichols, Gordon Cooper all have this in common. Some of the older members of the audience may. Excellent. They've all had their remains shot into space. One of the ethical concerns that crosses a couple of categories is, does this now add to the already existing problem of space junk? It's actually not all that expensive to have this done. I looked up, $13,000 if you want a burial on the moon. My brother-in-law is a funeral director back in New York. You can't bury somebody in New York for $13,000. So this sounds like a bargain to me. I think it was something like $500, to just shoot somebody into space in a little capsule. That is already not cost prohibitive. So once this starts catching on and becoming more popular, are we now increasing the space junk? And then we also have the issue of if people are electing to do the burial on the moon, what are we doing with that surface from a contamination perspective? All right, let's go to Team Earth category. This is the term for when a resource is removed from the environment at a rate faster than it can be replaced. I thought we did this one already. Oh no, Jeff. Next slide, and then you'll see the picture of home. There we go. Oh no, we're back at the beginning. All right, in February 2024, US officials warned Russia not to deploy this. It was the nuclear-armed anti-satellite device that we just mentioned before. No confirmation that it exists, but Wall Street Journal reported that Moscow had, I guess, leaked in some way that they had this capability, which of course would violate a whole bunch of agreements on the international stage, but also there's ethical issues of doing that, right? So, oops, there we go. Again, one of the ethical challenges is once somebody does it, does that now remove the prohibition for everybody else, especially something on this scale? Okay, let's go back to Team Mars. The board's been completely reset, so we're going to have to gamble here. We can all blame Jeff for this. War is up. You wouldn't want to get stung by one of these while swimming in the ocean, and soon you may need to worry about them coming from space. Stung in the ocean. What is a jellyfish? Excellent. Can we try the video again, Jeff? Let's see if it works. Sound? All right. Technology's bit me in the rear end twice. So what they're talking about is that, I don't know any of you are UFO junkies, but this is the most recent release of an alleged unidentified aerial phenomena that flew over one of the United States military bases in the Middle East. Some interesting things about this video. That base obviously has perimeter defenses that were unable to stop this device and unable to track the device. The only thing that was able to catch it and film it was an infrared camera. If you watch the video, you'll see it goes dark, it goes light, it goes dark. So people who've watched it and studied it have said it must have some power source that it is propelling. It's not a balloon. Also, people who were at that base that day were asked to go outside and see if they could take a picture or film it. Even it was approximately 50 feet or so off the ground, and no one could see it. Once the device, whatever that is, left the military base, it went out over a body of water, and it's still on this infrared film, dunking itself under the body of water for about 15 minutes. Then it arises out and shoots off into the atmosphere. So war is hell. Yeah, it already is. But what if that is the next phase of war? If we keep poking the bear that's called outer space, right? We don't really know what's out there. We don't know that there's nothing out there. But if that's out there, that is pretty scary if it could get through a military base's perimeter defenses. Okay, moon, pick another category. You don't want to get stung by that jellyfish. That's what they called it, by the way, not my name, because it has the dangling things. What are you picking? We haven't done that one. The area of law that focuses on natural environment, human health, natural resources. What would that be called? It's an area of law. Oh my gosh, the cadets finally earned one. Environmental law. You didn't have to get a gift this time. Yeah, so we have lots of environmental laws, obviously here in the United States, and some international agreements on them. And I think most people recognize that despite those, we've done a relatively poor job as stewards of this planet. So yeah, let's go ruin another celestial body. There is no environmental regulations for Mars, let's say. There are no environmental for rules or laws for other celestial bodies that we may be able to land ourselves on. Are we going to be ruining those other places? There's also the question of, and I had never heard this before, historic lunar sites. So apparently Neil Armstrong's boot imprint has been designated historic. How do we prevent somebody from going there and kicking the dust over his boot imprint, right? Or running a rover over it? And there's other sites on the moon that have been designated as historic landing sites, but there's no mechanism in place now for preservation of those. Then there's the other idea on this, and that is space is beautiful, untamed, completely natural, wild, almost like a national park. Should it have some kind of designation that we protect it from things like mining, crashing onto planetary bodies that disrupt what we don't know to be there, right? We could be already disrupting life forms or other types of parts of the ecosystem that matter. Okay, we're going to go over to Earth. Go back to the board. I believe what the Musk for 800 wasn't chosen. Yep, we did. My bad. 600. In one interview, Elon Musk suggested this would be a good way to retrieve water from Mars. I'll give you a hint. Digging is not the answer. Okay. Yeah, he suggested we detonate a nuclear device. Ethical concerns with that. First, let's think about the payload of a nuclear device on a launch on a SpaceX rocket. And we saw 88% success rate before. What if that one's the one that's in the 12% that didn't successfully leave the atmosphere? There's an ethical issue of where would that detonate and what would it do to everything below it as well as the atmosphere? What if it detonated in the layer where all of our satellites are, right? So assuming we could even successfully get it there, scientists have looked at it and said, we actually don't even possess enough nuclear weapons on the Earth in total to be able to accomplish what he is suggesting. Then there's the issue of Mars' surface. If you detonate something there, it creates what's called a haboob, never heard that before, which is a giant dust cloud going faster than the speed of sound. Would it catastrophically change the Mars surface? And again, since we're unsure about the existence of life in whatever form it may be, would we be eradicating whatever is there already? What's the responsibility, the ethical responsibility with an idea like that? By the way, I think he might have been joking. He did tweet out, or X out, I guess now, about this and said he's making t-shirts to nuke Mars. So always the entrepreneur, right? All right, let's go back to Mars. We did that one. Okay, we didn't do this one. There are, as of January, there are approximately 8,377 of these. Remember the title, Watch Your Junk. Fantastic. What are satellites? Oh, we went too far. Yeah, what is a satellite? So SpaceX, for example, plans to increase the number of satellites it is putting into orbit. There are already 8,000. If their plan is to if its plan is to put another 4,000 satellites up, that's almost 50% increase in what's out there. Also, what I was unaware of, those of you in the space field maybe, there were 26,000 orbital avoidance maneuvers conducted just by those 8,000 satellites last year alone. Or sorry, in between 2020, 2022, which means an average of 12 maneuvers or so per satellite, already to avoid contact with either debris or another satellite. If you introduce another 4,000 into it, we have a situation where it says it'd be like an interstate highway at rush hour in a snowstorm with everyone driving much too fast, right? What's the ethics associated with crowding an already crowded layer in the atmosphere? 134% higher was the maneuvers that had to be made in 2022 versus previous ones. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to collide, but they had to make maneuvers to make sure they wouldn't collide. You know, there's also the International Space Station that sits up there, has to make maneuvers as well. So what are the ethics associated with crowding an already crowded area, particularly from the private sector? Back to the main board, Jeff. I believe we're at the moon. All right, this is the term associated with the prevention of transferring hazards from Earth to space. We had a question before, space to Earth. That was called backward contamination. Wow, what a genius. Forward contamination, yeah. So some interesting statistics about this I'll put up in just a moment. But are we bringing things here when we go land on a place like Mars, right? There are anti-contamination procedures that are put in place before something's sent into space, but there's no guarantee that that actually is successful. As a matter of fact, the International Space Station had reported as of March 21, 3 new species of bacteria found inside the International Space Station. They originated from Earth, but in space, they've undergone changes that would not happen if they'd stayed here on Earth. So even when we do have things we think are safe that we're putting into space, we don't know what the changes will be to those microorganisms that will then change how they react with human beings or what they might do to the equipment we bring up there. So I said, we have sterilization procedures, but particularly with the moon, those have been relaxed because there's the idea that the moon doesn't have any contaminants that are bad for humans on it. All right, let's go over to Team Earth. We haven't done this one. All right, let's see if my colleagues in uniform know this. The concept that is based on knowing something that creates a value or has an advantage or an edge that other people don't know from a military perspective. Ooh, asymmetric advantage. Look at that. Give yourself some ribbons over there. Yeah. Okay, so we're not supposed to put anything that's weapon related into space. But you know, whoever does first gains that asymmetric advantage. I was reading about the US military's activities in the last couple of conflicts in the Middle East, and in fact, proudly here at USAFA, we own the air, right? That creates an asymmetric advantage for us that we can then exploit and our adversary cannot match. Well, when the first weapon system arrives in space, and I do think it's inevitable that it will at some point, that will create an asymmetric advantage for whoever has done that. So I would argue that that already has been violated because we have satellites that are used by the military. Is that not already some form of weaponry? The GPS systems, targeting, et cetera. Now, some people posit that, you know, in those conflicts in the Middle East, the fact that we had that kind of weaponry actually was better for mankind because we were able to be more precise in targeting. It limited collateral damage, made sure that we were doing things within the Geneva Convention. But that's, again, a credit to the people who are using those tools that we have. But what happens when somebody is not so quite concerned about those things, or puts something that is more damaging and harmful than a satellite? There is that temptation for that asymmetric advantage that right now no one has. And the ethical question is, who will be the first to get it? Back to home. And we are back to Mars. In this film, crew member Kane had an alien removed from his face and then one exploded out of his chest. What is alien? Yeah. So this is a little bit of a fun slide. We don't know what life exists out there, but if you're like me, you hope it's Alf, right? That it has a great sense of humor, hates cats, and doesn't present us any harm. But might it be the one that was on the ship with Ridley? Could those aliens exist? I suppose. And in that movie, right, he gets infected. So again, we've talked about contamination back to the Earth. We've talked about bringing contamination out there. We've talked about contaminating devices, but what about human beings, right? What would happen if somebody carried a virus like COVID to a Mars installation where it takes 9 months to get there? You have to wait 3 months for you to be able to turn back and then 9 months to return. It would take at least to send something from here to there, 12 months as far as a cure goes, right? So once we start creating bases and a human presence, might we be connecting with organisms, hopefully as cool as Alf, but perhaps not? And what are the ethics associated with putting people in a place where we have almost no ability to deliver resources to them should some type of an infection or other type of illness break out? I actually read that there was some illnesses on the International Space Station, colds, urinary tract infections that astronauts get. Apparently they react differently because of the zero gravity environment. So we've already had these issues of illnesses and infections, et cetera, in space. What happens when you are further away and we don't have an ability to bring you resources? I actually read online that there was an astronaut who had a blood clot and was able to, through communication back to Earth, do some type of medical procedure that alleviated the blood clot. Amazing. I'm not sure you can do that if you're sitting on Mars. Okay, back to the main board, Jeff, and we go to the moon. It's not that hard. This is the term defined as the action of appropriating a place or domain for one's own use. I'll give you a hint. England was accused of it for a very long time. The United States has been accused of it as well. What? Colonization. Yeah. So there's a bit of hubris that human beings have, that we are the best species that exists, right? We know we're smarter than the ones here on Earth, but we don't know that we're smarter than anything else that may exist. Is our hubris to go and colonize or put our footprint on places where we have not been or where we don't see anyone else? Is there ethical challenges with that, right? We know historically here on our planet, we have not done a very good job in this area and have abused populations, abused national resources. So no one owns the moon, no one owns Mars until somebody gets there and sets up a base. I saw an interesting question too. What happens if you're on the moon and you have a baby? What is the citizenship of that child? Do they become a moonling? Is there a new category? Right? We don't have those questions answered either, right? We want to put these bases up and populate. We don't know. So Terraforming of Mars without first assuring there is no indigenous, even dormant, any type of species that may live there. So there is that aspect of colonialization. Back to the main board, Jeff. And we're up at Earth. That's not the right one. Our board is broken again. Let's go War Held 800. Nope, we did that one. We did that one. We may be almost at the end here. We did that one. 600. We did that one. We only have 3 left. We didn't do this one. It's estimated that there are more than 34,000 of these that are larger than 10 centimeters. Remember, watch your junk. What's the answer, Earth? What is space junk? Yeah. There's over 500,000 pieces of space debris that are between 1 and 10 centimeter. From what I've gathered is those could be catastrophic as well if there's a collision with something like the International Space Station. So again, we'll connect this to some other categories, ideas like space tourism, space burials, the proliferation of satellites into space. These are all issues that exacerbate an already difficult and challenging problem. Anybody in the room want to tell me, do we have a way so far to eliminate space junk? We really don't. So this is a problem that we are only making worse with no solution to mitigate. That is insane. So we have to be more mindful from just an ethical perspective. Are we putting people who travel, even our own astronauts, in danger if we increase the amount of space junk? Back to the main board, Jeff. I think we have 1 category left, and we may have already done it. All right, Elon Musk hopes this will be the next family vacation instead of going to Disneyland. What would that be, Mars? Well, that's very specific, but we'll say space tourism is in general. So I've watched that show, For All Mankind. I've seen a little bit, again, from a Hollywood perspective, what it takes to be an astronaut. And apparently in 2024, it doesn't take that much anymore because we've put civilians up into orbit in some way or another. Are we contributing to, again, once we start space tourism, how many additional rockets will be going up? As an ethical question, I like this statistic. A single passenger aboard a rocket is responsible for 100 times more climate changing pollution than a single passenger aboard an airplane. So if we're already worried about issues connected to the climate, is it ethical to engage in space tourism where we are exacerbating the erosion of our atmosphere for our own particular thrill of experiencing zero gravity? I would say no. Jeff, back to our last one. We have 1 left. We did this one. All right, let's go to the end, Jeff. It's not the end, but it is the end. So just summing up, right, we had the issue of what the Musk, little play on words, but yeah, we have private industry now engaging in space travel, but also all kinds of forms, space tourism, shooting off remains into space, which is exacerbating other problems related to space junk and environmental contamination here in the US, right? Just the rocket fuel alone. Our next category was watch your junk, right? We've talked about the number of satellites that exist out there and the fact that we plan to put 50% to 100% more up there in an already crowded, that quote, right? It's rush hour on a snow-covered freeway with everybody driving too fast. Are there ethical questions we need to ask about that? Connecting it back to the tourism and the celestial burials. The amount of space junk that we're creating is just going up at an alarming rate. Let's ruin another planet. yeah, we've heard, oh, let's colonize Moon, let's colonize Mars. And usually you hear it in the event Earth becomes inhabitable. That should be an alarm right there. Why are we worried about infecting another place when we haven't even fixed what we've done here? There's also the issue of who has the rights to do that. Our other category, war is hell. We've talked a little bit about weaponry in space, which we already have through satellite systems. That report in the Wall Street Journal about Russia putting up a nuclear anti-satellite device. These things are out there. And that question of asymmetric advantage, who will be the first? And then the last category, right, you think COVID is bad. We do not know what life forms exist out there. We do not know what their impact would be if we brought them here. On the human population, we don't know what their impact would be on our astronauts or other space travelers. We also don't know what we are doing to those environments when we bring things from our home planet out there. As we've seen, the International Space Station already has some form of bacteria that changed the way it grows because it was present in space. So there are a lot of ethical issues, not a lot of solutions. We do have some laws out there, but again, my understanding of the treaties is that there are a lot of countries who have signed off, but then internally have not ratified. So what does that really mean for enforcement purposes? So I want to thank you for spending a few fun moments with me to blow through some ethics and ethical questions regarding space and space travel. And I appreciate your time today and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Professor Vogel, for that presentation. I do have one ethical answer, and that is a gift that costs less than $20. So in appreciation, please accept one of our coveted conference coins. Okay, we're on official break until 13:30, but please remember in about 10 minutes, for those of you that are Nebraska grads, if you could start filter up to the front, Professor Beard would like to do a photo with all the Nebraska grads. So we'll see you up here in about 10, 15 minutes.